Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Matt here, back with another review. Today we're talking about the Viltrox 85mm f1.8 for Fujifilm X mount. As I begin all my reviews, we're going to talk about the physical aspects of this lens. So first of all, there's obviously no hiding it. It makes this Fujifilm X-E2 look a little bit ridiculous because of how much bigger it is than it, but if you take off the lens hood, it becomes a little bit more manageable. It's marginally bigger than the 16mm 1.4 from Fujifilm, but the 16mm 1.4 is either the same weight, if not a little bit heavier than this lens. I don't know how to describe it because it is smaller and they're both made from all metal, but the 16mm 1.4 is just like denser, I guess. It has a very simple design. There's not a lot going on the lens. There's no switches, and there's only one ring for focus. So that will make some Fujifilm people a little bit mad that there's no aperture ring on this lens. But for me personally, even though I got really used to having aperture rings on all my Fujifilm lenses, I got used to not having an aperture ring on this, and it's easy to just make a shortcut in whatever Fujifilm camera you have to just hit a button, all of a sudden your dial's aperture instead of shutter speed or ISO or whatever you have it set it to. Some Viltrox people are not going to be happy about the fact that the lens hood is made of plastic, and it is not nearly as nice as the Viltrox 56mm 1.4, where it just, I don't know, it was metal, it matched exactly with the lens. I mean, this does match the lens, but it doesn't go on nearly as nice. Like, it's difficult, like a lot of plastic lens caps to get on. The Fujifilm plastic lens caps are notorious for that, but I don't know, you can tell there's a major improvement when it comes to the Viltrox 56 1.4, and the lens cap just snaps on there and it feels specifically built for that lens, and this one just feels like any standard lens cap that's difficult to get on. Another cool thing that a lot of Viltrox lenses have, since they are a third-party company, is they have this USB port you can see on the back of the lens there. I love the close focus distance of the 16 1.4. You can get it right up there. Because of that USB port, you can update your Viltrox lenses over time as they come out with new firmwares for them. So now we're on to the image quality of this lens, which you guys were interested in seeing more about. I put a poll on my community tab, which is now open since we hit 500 subscribers, so thank you guys for that. Go check out the community tab and interact with the polls and whatever posts I have on there if you want to support the channel. But yeah, I put a poll up and people wanted to know more about image quality in terms of like chromatic aberration, sharpness, and stuff like that. So an interesting fact about this lens, even though it's marketed and sold as a 1.8 lens, there's a firmware for the Sony version of this, at least, where you can make it a 1.6 lens. And you will notice that this, when it's wide open at 1.8, the aperture is actually closed down a little bit. So it's technically a 1.6 lens, or I've even heard when I read some posts from people who did update their Sony version of this lens, they found that even at 1.6, the aperture seemed to be stopped down a little bit. So this might be a true 1.4 lens, but the firmware that's inside of it doesn't allow you to utilize that the full way. I would absolutely love it if someone would come out with a way to make the Fuji version a 1.6 or even a 1.4, but currently that's only for the Sony version from what I found. I think maybe Viltrox did this because the image quality might not have been as good whenever the lens was truly opened up all the way, so they just made the firmware not allowed to do that, so it seemed like it was better than it really was. But I think they didn't want to go all the way to f2 because the 1.8 makes this a little bit more interesting for people who might be between this and the Fujifilm 90mm f2. Maybe that 1.8 aperture would push them towards the cheaper Viltrox one. From what I've heard, people with Sony cameras that have used the 1.6 version of this, it looks exactly the same as the 1.8 version. So again, I really don't know why Viltrox has made the firmware this way, but they have. And because of that, it actually has really, really great image quality because it's not technically opened all the way. It's a little bit of a cheat code. There's not much vignetting at 1.8. I have an example image here. There's not much chromatic aberration either. I'm sure there would be at 1.4, but a lot of 1.4 lenses, when you start getting closer to f2, they kind of lose a lot of the optical imperfections. So I think that's the cheat code that Viltrox is employing here. Honestly, you guys asked me to talk about sharpness and stuff here. All I can say is it is exceptionally sharp. I'm happy with it. I would say the 56 might even be a little bit sharper than this, but honestly, when I use this lens, I don't think much about sharpness. It's plenty sharp enough. And what I think about when I stop down the aperture is not so much the increase in sharpness I'm gonna get, but the increase in depth of field, which I guess more of your image is sharp, but throughout any aperture, what is in focus is plenty sharp. And finally, as per the results of that poll as well, we're going to talk a little bit about the autofocus from this lens. I do have a horror story for coming from this lens, actually. So I would say the autofocus, from what I've seen on Viltrox lenses from the two that I've owned, which is the 56 and the 85, it is definitively different than the Fujifilm autofocus. It's not as confident. You're gonna miss more shots. And video autofocus is a little bit weird. It's prone to like suddenly just jump on something else. But for the most part, it seems to lock onto you pretty well. It's probably just a case of Viltrox needing to kind of perfect their firmwares over time, but that's just what I've experienced. I have used this lens for a video on my other channel, but honestly, the 85mm focal length, which is a full frame equivalent of 135mm, it is not ideal for filming yourself. You're going to want a much wider angle lens. And even just for other kinds of videos like films and stuff, I've now shot a short film and I do a lot of video work for clients and stuff. I've never needed a lens this long. It would be so limiting. A lot of times you're shooting inside. You want to, if I'm doing a car video, I want to get the whole car in frame. Or if I do a detail shot, something at like 55mm is plenty macro enough, or just use an actual macro lens. I find that for video, I really don't need this focal length very often. But if you insist on using it, this one is actually better, I think, than the 56. But I have not used it outside where foliage can kind of trip up in the background. But I'm not really interested in doing that, and I don't think a lot of other people would be either. So my horror story with this lens is, as I've mentioned, it's not as confident and you're going to miss some shots. I was using this for photographing a wedding. You can probably see where this is going because we're under the autofocus section. Everything was going fine. I knew that it wasn't going to get as much of a hit rate, so I would lock focus, take like 3 or 4 pictures, lock focus, take 3 or 4 more, and I do that a couple times for any important moments in the wedding. And I didn't miss most of the shots that I needed to get, but I missed a very important shot, and that was the kiss. Not good. So obviously, the ceremony was outside. It was a beautiful day. The whole family was watching. They've said their vows. They put the rings on each other's fingers, and they're going in for the kiss. I get this up for the perfect close-up shot of the kiss. I lock on right before the moment, 3 or 4 shots. Boom, they're in focus. I lock on right before they actually kiss, 3 or 4 shots, all out of focus. I was using single point autofocus, so I'd lock focus, take 3 or 4. It happened to be off. It wasn't off that much for the wedding, but it just happened that it missed focus at possibly the most critical shot you could possibly need to get at a wedding. So using this professionally for photography, just based off that experience, it's a no-go for me. But I do use it professionally for photography a lot. But I would say professionally for photography in a high-stakes one-shot situation like that, I would never use this lens again. I will not make that mistake again. Luckily, my second shooter at that wedding ended up getting the shot on a Fujifilm kit lens, zoomed into 55mm, just like I said. For most situations, you don't need any more than 55mm, and that's why I think the Viltrox 56mm is probably my favorite portrait lens. This one, it does have really great results for portraits. You know what? I'm just gonna call it here. Final thoughts on this lens. This is really a lens meant for taking pictures of people, and that's because it's a pretty niche focal length. It's really too long for an everyday walk-around lens, and that's why I struggled and really only got, in my opinion, pretty uninteresting detail shots with this lens as a walk-around lens. But the compression that this gives you for portraiture is noticeably nicer than the 56mm that I've had at 1.4. Even shooting this at f2, f2.8, it's not the aperture that does the legwork for you in portraiture, it's that compression that gives you that flattering look. So I'm at a crossroads because I have said that I like the 56mm more, and now I'm saying that the compression is noticeably nicer on this. And I think that's just because there are lots of situations where this is just simply too long. So like, say you want to take a picture of somebody on a bridge over water. They're going to lean up against the rail, and you being up against the other rail, you're too close. What are you going to do? Get in the water? It's just too long for that. The 56mm might be fine, or even something a little bit wider, but it's too long for a lot of everyday situations. And then if you're going to try to use this for like wildlife, like a telephoto lens, it's too short for that. So it's really only good for taking pictures of people in somewhat controlled environments. And because of that, it's a pretty niche focal length in my opinion. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. If you have an unlimited budget, you should get the Fujifilm 90mm f2 every single time over this lens. If not just for the sole purpose, it's a first-party lens. It's also regarded as one of Fujifilm's absolute best lenses that they've ever put out. But the fact of the matter is, price is what comes down to a lot of people's buying decisions. That's why I got the Viltrox 56mm 1.4 instead of the Fujifilm 56mm 1.2, and that's why I got the 85 1.8 instead of the 90mm f2. But you're probably getting 90% of the image quality with this that you are with Fujifilm lenses. What you're paying for with the Fujifilm lens is better, more reliable autofocus. So stuff like my horror wedding story doesn't happen to you. And you're paying just for, I don't know, I've only owned this lens for a few months. Who's to say if it even works 5 years from now? And Fujifilm lenses, even the oldest versions of them, have stood the test of time. And we do know that they will last a long time. Maybe it will last a long time. Maybe it won't. The fact of the matter is quality control is not as good with third-party companies. So, like I said, if you have unlimited budget, Fujifilm 90mm. If you have a limited budget, get this one. But really think about why you want this focal length. Is it because you want a telephoto for wildlife? It's not long enough for that. Is it for portraiture? You might be a lot more comfortable if you're just buying a 1 prime for portraiture. You might be a lot more comfortable with a 35 or a 56 when it comes to crop sensor. I think this is a nice lens. I think it's a niche lens, but whenever I use it in the right scenarios, I do find that it's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. So it's hard. It's just a hard one for me to review because I want to say like you don't need a lens like this. And that really is true for most people. But if you are trying to just cover your bases at a lot of focal lengths and you're just going to bust it out every once in a while, yeah, maybe consider this lens. So thank you so much for watching. I hope I told you everything you wanted to know about this lens. Let me know in the comments if there's something I missed so I can be sure to incorporate that in the next video. Try to check out the polls on my community tab and just keep up with the channel. I appreciate all your support. 500 subscribers plus. Thank you guys so much. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.